vremuri strămoșești, cuvânt de dor și luptă, de doine și povești. Dar dacă astăzi pacea e lege și scut, e pentru că pe lume partidul s-a născut. Dacă astăzi mergem spre țări pe drum știut, e pentru că pe lume partidul s-a născut. E pentru că pe lume partidul s-a câte dulci cuvinte le-am moștenit în grai, doar bănuiam ce înseamnă ce tâlcuri au sub strai. Dar dacă astăzi tâlcul de plin am priceput, e pentru că pe lume partidul s-a născut. окраин, южный гор до северных морей. Человек проходит, как хозяин, необъятной родины своей. Тут жизнь невольна и широка, точно Волга полная течет. Молодым везде у нас дорога, старикам везде у нас почет. ибо никто у нас не лишний, по заслугам каждый награжден. Золотыми буквами мы пишем всенародный сталинский закон. Этих слов величие и славу никакие годы не сотрут. Человек всегда имеет право на учение, подвиг и на труд. Страна моя родная, поколение, поколение, я другой такой страны не знаю, я такой на весь человек, я другой такой страны не знаю, я такой на весь человек. Над страной весенний ветер веет, каждым днем все радостнее жить. И никто на свете не умеет лучше нас смеяться и любить. Но сурово брови мы насупим, если враг захочет нас сломать. Как небесную родину мы любим, бережем, как ласковую мать. Страна моя родная, поколение, поколение, я другой такой страны не знаю, я такой на весь человек, я другой такой страны не знаю, я такой на весь человек.
что рабочий и сам. И так как все мы люди, то должны мы извинить, и что-то есть. Хотят накормить нас пустой болтовней, чертям спасибо за честь. Марш левый, два, три, марш левый, два, три, взять ряды, товарищ, нам. Ты войдешь в наш единый рабочий фронт, потому что рабочий ты сам. И так как ты рабочий, то не жди, что нам поможет другой. Себе мы свободу добудем твою своей рабочей рукой. Марш левый, два, три, марш левый, два, три, встать ряды, товарищ, нам. Ты войдешь в наш единый рабочий фронт, потому что рабочий ты сам. In der Arbeiter Einheitsfront, weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist. Ты войдешь в наш единый рабочий фронт, потому что рабочий ты сам. Rein ein in der Arbeiter Einheitsfront, weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist.
Утреннего стяг в жизни важен первый шаг. Слышишь, реют над страною ветры яростных атак. И вновь продолжает собой, и сердцу тревожно в груди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. Весть летит во все концы, вы поверьте нам, отцы. Будут новые победы, станут новые бойцы. Милости не жди, жизнь для правды не щади. Нам, ребята, в этой жизни только с правдой по пути. И он продолжает собой, и сердце тревожно в груди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди.
Greetings, everybody, and welcome. It is the evening of the 7th of July, 2025. And here we are with a live stream tonight, answering your questions, as is becoming the custom. So thanks to all 202 of you who are watching thus far. Be sure to like and share the stream if you haven't done so already. And be sure to spread the word. So tonight, going to be going through your questions as they've come in. We've got several coming in on the chat, and I've got a few on email as well, so I'll be getting to those. So I'm going to be just get straight into the questions in the chat. We'll come to the email questions later on. So hello to Slumbering Colossus and Holger Ritter. Edward is the first up, though, and Edward is our Lithuanian correspondent, shall we say. And the question from him is, how is the CPGBML planning and fulfilling the plan of educating and step-by-step raising the consciousness of a working class that has been atomized and hyper-individualized by deindustrialization? Excellent question. And the way I would put it is this. The problem confronting us now is, as Edward's question indicates, enormous due to the hyper-individualization and atomization. That's not just the product of deindustrialization. I think that was being promoted relentlessly anyway. But I don't think the situation is quite as irreversible as some think. But let's get to Edward's actual question. How do you counter it? Now, this goes in several stages. And I don't think this just applies to Britain. I think that Britain is a particularly extreme case. But it also applies to the United States. It applies to most of Western Europe. See, what's needed is for the working class to discover the realities, the full implications of itself being working class. And what I mean by that is there has been a conscious effort on behalf of the bourgeoisie to erode the working class's knowledge of itself as a class. Now, most workers might understand that they are working class on some level. But as I always go back to Marx from The Poverty of Philosophy, where he's talking about the different levels of consciousness. Or, you know, you could also use the example of Stalin in Anarchism or Socialism, when Stalin talks about the lag in consciousness, where material circumstances change and consciousness lags behind that. So what we've got at the moment is a situation where you have a working class in the imperialist countries, which, if we look at it by numbers, is of course bigger than ever, because working class, when it comes down to it, is a quite simple definition to it, which is, can you are you obliged to sell your labor to work, or do you have stores of capital that you could live off without working? Do you have to work wielding or maintaining or using the product of the means of production, or do you own the means of production or own some means of production? Now, I'm aware that there are others out there who use other definitions for this, but fundamentally that is the baseline definition of working class. I don't buy into the various cultural arguments that are used about which bit of the working class is the real working class. No, if you have to sell your labor to live, then you are one of the working class. Now, of course, there's different layers within that. There's what I would call productive and non-productive labor. Productive labor being those who are engaged in the extraction of raw materials, the production of commodities, and I would also argue myself the distribution of commodities. All of those workers exist within what is generally termed to be the group of workers who carry out productive labor, those whose work is directly related to the profit margins of capital. Say if a group of miners go on strike and the companies can't get the raw resources out of the ground anymore, which causes a whole supply chain to judder to a halt, that's a group of workers with real industrial power. If factory workers who are producing commodities go on strike, that's real power. If truck drivers or train drivers go on strike, that's real power. Those people have a real impact upon the profits of capital, because they are the people who extract the resources, manufacture them into commodities, and distribute them to the point of sale. So the productive working class has been shrunk in the imperialist countries, but it is still there. There's a hell of a lot of transport workers still. In fact, in many ways, that's a category of employee that's been added to. There's still a fair size of of manufacturing employees. In fact, even in imperialist countries, it's reduced severely from where it was, but there's still enough there to make an impact if these people went on strike. And there's some resource extraction, but not a lot. But what there is a giant growth in the non-productive working class. And people get very upset when you start using this language, but let's not beat around the bush. Other than like the factory jobs that I've had, most of my working life has been spent in non-productive jobs, meaning you don't produce actual profit by your labor. Especially if you're in the public sector, you can argue justly that a lot of like public sector jobs do provide a social good, and that's true. But the most of the work that is done by the paper shufflers is non-productive, and the way in which we have to address this problem relates to two things. First of all, there needs to be a full realization amongst all the different layers of the working class of the implications of their class position, and that means to go back to Edouard's question about what the communist parties should do, is first step is to actually go and start actively working in working class areas to try and recruit the advanced workers. Now, what do I mean by this? We're not aiming at this stage, not in the imperialist countries, for like mass membership parties. We can't do that at the moment because for a number of reasons. First of all, to have a communist party in the imperialist countries right now would take it having a solid foundation. At the moment, we are only at the very beginnings of being able to build a solid foundation. So, solid foundation is based on having a party of well-trained, advanced worker communist cadres that you recruit from the working class areas, who go through a very often mentally strenuous program of political education and practical action to start building up the party. And in that process, a lot of the people you initially recruit will not be able to handle it and will drop out, because this is where we are right now. We're not even at the stage of, if we're going to make comparisons, like the Bolsheviks immediately prior to 1905. We're like back in the early day, if we're going to use the Russia comparison, we're back in like the early days of Marxism in Russia, which is we're going from small agitational groups to actually building up to like small party organizations with a decent presence in working class areas. That's our aim. And so you build a cadre-based organization. The ideal thing you want is you want a lot of, you want a decent number of to use, you can call them cadres, you can call them organic intellectuals of the working class, who are, I would say, knowledgeable and trusted voices in their community and workplaces. They don't necessarily, a worker communist doesn't actually necessarily have to have a union job, or I should say an elected union position. It has to be somebody who has actually knowledge and respect amongst his or her fellow workers. And the reason why I would say what we must aim to do is build up a solid organization, although necessarily at this stage it will be a relatively small organization, is so that when crisis evolves and the masses move into action, we have enough people in the right areas who can make an intervention when there is an upsurge in militancy, that the communists can hope to influence that in the right direction. So one of the problems that the left in the imperialist countries has is that because it's run by, it largely consists of opportunists, Trotskyites, and other kinds of people who, even the sincere ones, want to skip over like several stages and just immediately run to, I don't know, the revolution scenes from Les Miserables or something. The truth is that right now we have to work hard to find the advanced workers, recruit them, and educate them. It's a difficult and sometimes unrewarding task, but that's what the job that has fallen to us. See, what we need to overcome is not only the legacy of atomization due to deindustrialization, but also the poisonous legacies of social democracy. And that's like a huge thing. The poisonous legacies of social democracy, which includes not just like the legacy of the Labour Party, but also the legacy of like the revisionist communist parties. See, all of that needs to be overcome, which is why I say we're in the very early building stages in the imperialist countries right now. We shouldn't expect to build mass organizations overnight. We shouldn't expect the working class to turn to us immediately. We should expect and should work towards advanced workers coming in, getting organized and educated, and being ready to start building local Communist Party branches in their neighborhoods, oriented around themselves and other advanced workers. Again, communist parties at this stage in the West are going to be small. They're going to go through. We're going to burn through a fair amount of people who don't have the necessary level of commitment, who don't have the necessary patience, and who won't learn it. This is a difficult and at least medium term to long term job that we're engaged in to, again, train a new generation of cadres. Don't all have to be from the younger generation, but it would help if a lot of them were, who will put down roots for the party and start building organizations inside working class areas where no one sought to organize for decades. That's the challenge at this stage. And it's important that we're realistic about that. And it's important to pick up on something that Sid said in the comments, which is, I'll just read Sid's comment out, which is that the Western proletariat needs to be completely disabused of the idea that any change can be addressed through the ballot box. Yeah, that time's gone. That time's gone. There was a time earlier on in the history of American capitalism, and there was a time earlier on in the history of British imperialism, where, due to largely the unique combination of circumstances that occurred after 1917, with living with the legacy of the October Revolution, where the parliamentary process appeared to deliver something. That was a unique combination of events which has now gone, and the bourgeoisie rapidly found ways, as I've said many times, to go around to get around the fact that the working class had the vote. And you don't get to vote out the ruling class. Never. They and their networks rule, no matter who is in Downing Street or who is in the White House or who is in the Elysee Palace. And many workers do understand that. I mean, we Marxists sometimes get down on our own efforts and think that the working class will never move. But the working class does understand. Many workers do understand instinctively. They might not have all the Marxist-Leninist language. They might not have drawn all the full realizations yet. But there is a very widespread realization amongst the working class here that the politicians don't matter, that there's forces who control things that they don't see, who are never on a ballot paper, who are never interviewed on television. And unfortunately, because workers reach that level of understanding, but there's no Communist Party around them that to show them the way forward, a lot of them fall into just cynicism, and a lot of them fall into the trap of, like, Alex Jones style conspiracy stuff. But the knowledge is there because workers know and can see that their life in their community and life for them in their workplace gets getting harder and harder, and that's been the case no matter who's in power. So there is an understanding of the nature of the beast there amongst the working class. What's not there is a knowledge of the full implications of that yet, and the full implications of that can only be drawn by the active intervention of the Communist Party. A worker can go a long way on his or her own in terms of, as Lenin analyzed, spontaneous development. You can go an awful long way with that, but the knowledge that you have to not only take to the streets, or like to use the 1905 revolution analogy, to actually form workers' councils to govern whole towns, cities, areas, countries through interconnected workers' councils, but also to draw the full implications of that spontaneous movement, which is that if workers' councils are formed, then the authority of the capitalist state needs to be destroyed, and the capitalist state itself needs to be destroyed. And one of the reasons I talk about the need to overcome the legacy of social democracy is that I think, particularly amongst the older generations, less so amongst the younger generations, there is still something of an expectation that reform can still come through the state. That's the poisonous legacy of social democracy. So what the working class needs to understand, and I think many workers are closer to this than we think. It's just that they haven't joined up all the dots yet. Is that the current state is not ours, as Lenin argued in State and Revolution, cannot be wielded by us. It is filled with people, and it's staffed by people who are our enemies, and it needs to be smashed and destroyed and replaced with something new, which we will construct. And that realization can only properly come through the intervention of communists. And that's why we have to be in the stage right now of recruiting and getting as many advanced workers into our ranks as possible, to have them politically trained and be ready to take that understanding out to the wider working class. So it's finalize my answer to Edward's question. It's a question of education, organization, reaching the working class where they live and where they work, and getting them to join the dots together. All the instinctive realizations that workers have about things that they might not be able to be fully aware of the implications of the things that they observe, but it's the job of the communists to bring that realization to them. And at the moment, we're in the potentially long and difficult process of recruiting and organizing amongst the working class in a way that's not been done in the British case, 70 plus years. It's difficult, and maybe the repression carried out by the British state, maybe the total collapse of the British economy, which is on the horizon, will aid us in that process. But it's going to be a long road, and thus we'd we best keep ourselves healthy. Right. So who's next? Hello to Matt Volmer, Victor, Comrade Lee Hinchliff, John Crowfeather, Alexander Lukter. Bertram Clement says, I started organizing with the Socialist Party in Swindon, but I think they are a little Trotskyite, to put it politely. Would you recommend I leave and join the CPGBML in Bristol? Yes. Next question, please. No. I mean, obviously, I would say that you should certainly leave the Socialist Party. One of the better decisions I made was leaving it. It's a dead end. I would say to Bertram Clement's question, go on the CPGBML website and read through the party program, read through the party positions, read some of the articles on there. And then if you agree with the basis of the party's analysis of the current situation, and not just the current situation, but historically how we got here, if you agree with the party's key positions, then certainly you should apply to become a supporter of the party. Yes. But don't go in blind. Read the key positions of the party and read the party's analysis and come with questions. It's always better to come with questions. But certainly, yes, leave the Socialist Party, go onto the CPGBML website, read through the analysis on there. And if you agree with most of it, then you certainly should apply for supporter status, which is the first phase of getting involved with the party. Slumbering Colossus says, blue in the face from denouncing the United Snakes genocide in the Levant. What can be done to end these deaths in Palestine, Lebanon, etc.? Anything outside the armed resistance? Well, as Hassan Nasrallah observed, the late General Secretary of Hezbollah, this isn't just about Palestine. It's not just about Lebanon or even Yemen or even Iran. It's a region-wide struggle to remove the US and Britain, in particular, but also France and their influence from the region. That's why this struggle is so bloody and so savage, because there is, as Nasrallah himself understood, there is a great deal at stake here, and that's why they killed him, because he was an effective leader. But his understanding was correct, which is like when Hamas and the others launched the military operation on October the 7th, 2023, they were doing so in the full knowledge that this would follow, because it's not just about removing the Israeli regime and collapsing the settler colonial state, even though that's a huge part of it. The settler colonial regime in occupied Palestine exists because, again, the British put it there to be a safeguarder of their interests, and the Americans maintain it to do the same thing, just the same way as they maintain the Saudi regime, the Bahraini regime, the Qatari regime, the Omani regime. And these are the pillars upon which the US and British control is built. So given that what the resistance forces are doing, and again, this is a resistance that didn't begin in October of 2023. It began, well, all the way, how long ago back do you want to go? You could argue that it began in the late 1900s. And you certainly intensified after the foundation of the Israeli settler colonial regime. And it's a struggle that has taken different forms. It is a struggle at some point that was led by like the likes of the PFLP, till they were pushed through various defeats to one side. And then it's a struggle that's been led by Islamic-inspired nationalist resistance movements. But it's a struggle that will always continue. And so what we're in now is an intensification of that struggle, where things and organizations and individuals will be tested and found wanting. Now, to answer Slumbering Colossus's question, what can be done to stop it? Well, variety of things. First of all, it'll be the masses of West Asia who will decide a lot of this. We can play our part and should play our part as well, but it's the masses of occupied Palestine, of Jordan, of Syria, of Lebanon, of Iraq, of Saudi Arabia itself, of Egypt, Algeria, Tunisia, etc., Morocco. All of these places which are kept under the US or the Anglo-American boot heel, the masses in all of these countries will eventually have to struggle to free their own nations from the domination of US and British imperialism. And that's a struggle that will take many years. It will potentially take a generation, but it's a struggle that has begun now and cannot be stopped. Like, the destabilization of the Israeli regime is not going to end. That's it has been fatally damaged by the operation carried out on October the 7th, and its reputation will never recover, nor will its internal stability ever recover. So this is a long-term struggle, and it will see, unfortunately, many more die. That's the sad reality of it. I mean, one of the people go on about how it's a live streams genocide, and that's correct, which it is. The problem is that for us, looking at it, one looks at the horrors on the screen every day, and your natural reaction is to say, I want to see this stopped. Why isn't anything happening? And you have to analyze and understand the situation, which is, this is happening because this bloodshed, this horror that you're seeing unfolding in front of you right now. This is what it takes to maintain the dominance of US and British imperialism in West Asia. This is what it was built on, after all, blood and savagery and slaughter. After all, that's how capitalism comes into the world. To use Marx's phrase, it comes into the world covered from head to foot in blood. And imperialism has always been like this. Remember, the French kept up a similar level of killing to that which the Israelis are doing now on a lower level of technology in Algeria for a decade, over a decade. Just look at how many the US killed in Korea. I believe it was at least 3 million. Just to look at how many they killed in Vietnam. Imperialism is a savage and brutal regime, a savage and brutal system. And to preserve itself, it will do exactly what it is doing now in Gaza and elsewhere. But in Gaza, when it comes to Gaza in particular, to preserve itself, no casualty level is beyond the pale for it. Hundreds of thousands, millions, tens of millions. I mean, look at the casualty levels in World War I. The only difference is now that they don't dare use the imperial core population as their main fighting force anymore. Look how many have died in Ukraine. Ukraine as a nation will be destroyed because of the actions of the imperialists. Not that the imperialists themselves care. So what it will take to end it is the defeat of the Israeli regime and the pushing out of US imperialism, meaning the removal of the comprador regimes upon which US and British imperialism and French imperialism still maintain their influence. So that means that the situation with regard to the internal politics of Lebanon will need to be resolved. I mean, Hezbollah have waged successful and heroic battles against US imperialism over many decades now, but they're still stuck in a situation where US imperialism dominates the national government and essentially runs the Lebanese army for the purposes of internal repression only, given it is incapable of actually defending the country. So there's the sovereignty question in Lebanon would have to be resolved. The question of what the hell is going to happen to Syria now it's being run by a puppet regime of the British and the US. That's what Al-Jilani is running. And it's a very useful education for people to see. David Lammy, this porcine buffoon of a foreign secretary who's going over there and shaking hands with Al-Jilani. It reveals exactly what a fraud the so-called war on terror always was. But restoring sovereignty to Syria, overthrowing the comprador king of Jordan, the destruction of the Saudi state, the driving out of the US from Iraq, all of these questions are things that all need to be addressed as part of this struggle. And you have the process of national liberation has started. When it concludes, we can't say for now, because it depends upon the intensity of the struggle. But we've seen US imperialism get exposed as still a brutal regime, but one that is distinctly limited by its inability to deploy its own forces en masse. So it can be stretched, and as it has been. But the next stage of liberation, the liberation struggles, we'll see, I think, the masses enter the scene in a more decisive way. I think we're perhaps coming to the end of one phase of struggle. The next phase of struggle will involve the important countries in the area. So there is the resolution of the status of Iraq, which is still somewhat under the heel of the US. The resurgence of a revolutionary process in Egypt will be necessary. The end of the Jordanian comprador regime. All of that will be the next phase. And at each stage, imperialism will murder and slaughter and brutalize people, but it won't win. In the end, it will be defeated. In the end, they will be driven out. It's just the unfortunate thing is that this struggle is going to take so long and claim so many lives. But in the end, US imperialism will be forced out. British imperialism will be forced out. But they're not going to go willingly, as they've shown. At the moment, they're getting the Israeli regime to do a lot of their killings for them. And they'll have the Saudi regime do it, and they'll have Wahhabi mercenaries do it. Eventually, they'll have to deploy their own men, and that's the point where they'll probably lose. It's not a particularly cheery answer I can give you there, but you don't come to this channel for happy stories. The truth is that we have an element of we have a role to play as well, which is we have to bring to the working class domestically the reality of imperialism, how we should be siding with the oppressed peoples of the world who are being attacked by our ruling class. And it is that we stand unashamedly with Iranian patriots fighting for the defense of their country, with Palestinian patriots fighting for the liberation of theirs, with revolutionaries in Yemen fighting for the unity of their country and the expulsion of the grotesque Saudi regime. Again, these are long-term and difficult struggles, which we must play our part in. But the real fight is the real front line is, of course, in the West Asian region itself. Hello to Comrade Davey and Lucas and David Ball, and Zeal asks, I wanted to ask, when can late-stage capitalism be understood to have begun? Also, what is specific to late-stage capitalism, not to other stages? I would say that late-stage capitalism can be defined perhaps more accurately as capitalism in its imperialist phase. That's the thing. I would say that late-stage capitalism is capitalism, this is my personal definition, is capitalism entering into its most parasitic, non-productive phase, which is what British capitalism entered into after the 1860s. And it's now we're in this stage of capitalism which I would call rotting, because if you look at British capitalism, it's real in reality, it's imperialism It's extraction of profit from overseas markets via the export of capital. It's principally the export of capital, not commodities. It's pure parasitism. Those are the characteristics of late capitalism. In reality, the late capitalism means, in the imperialist country's case, advanced cases of like imperial decay and rot. All the morbid symptoms, to use Gramsci's term, that Lenin describes in Imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism, that's late capitalism. It's capitalism that's moved beyond, as Lenin argued, the stage of free trade into the stage of monopolization, into the stage of finance capital, and into the stage of more and more pure parasitism. And that's what, in reality, that's late capitalism. I know there are other definitions of it, but I would say late capitalism more properly should be referred to as decadent, decaying, moribund finance capitalism or imperialism. Right. Going through the questions here. Be sure to like and share the stream if you haven't done so already. Thanks to all 326 of you watching and listening. Good evening to Comrade Jerry. Ben asks, it looks like the US is shedding proxies. Do you think it's real? 1, US supplies to Ukraine stop. 2, Colby says Taiwan is not vital, not worth losing a military conflict over. Now Trump announced 25% tariffs on all imports from Japan and occupied Korea. Well, I would say that the Ukraine war is an interesting one because it's not that they want it to, forget what Trump says. It's not that the US wants it to come to should we say, it wants to accept a defeat. It's that they are being forced into a position where they have no other choice but to accept a defeat. They can't mobilize their forces against the Russians. They would lose. They don't have the men. They don't have the equipment to do it. They've burnt through the equipment. And we know that they can't even meet their 50,000 shells a month production quota. So they can't fight. They can't continue it. They know that. So what's the plan? The plan isn't to completely abandon Ukraine. Now, Trump might from time to time say that. Some of the people in his circle might believe that. But the interests of the US ruling class dictate that Ukraine cannot be completely abandoned. The argument that's gone on with regard to Ukraine is about who takes ownership of it. My analysis of it is that it's going to end up being the British and the Western Europeans who end up holding this particular baby when the US decides to focus its attention elsewhere. It will also be the case, as I've argued many times, that it's not that they're going to give Ukraine up. It's that struggles move through various different phases. And the US and the British tried the open struggle against the Russians. Again, like this war was never meant to go on as long as it has done. Neither side planned for this. The British and American side thought that they would get a Russian collapse within about 3 to 6 months. The Russian side thought they'd get a negotiated settlement within about 3 to 6 months. Really 3 months. And both of their calculations have proven to be wrong. So now I think that what's going to go on is the struggle with Ukraine will continue. But within Ukraine will continue. The British aren't going to give it up. Now, what's happening is that the US can't actually sustain the open war. So what do? Well, you go to what they initially thought was going to happen. Initially, the US calculation was that the Russians would actually knock Ukraine over militarily pretty quickly and would try and occupy the whole country. That's proven not to be the case. What's happening at the moment is that you're seeing the Russians advance quicker and quicker towards like the Zaporozhye city. And the Russians are fully aware of the fact that now, if they stop or if they go for any negotiated option that the West is offering, the West will try and preserve what's left of like Banderite Ukraine, and then we'll just restart the war when they've managed to resupply the Kiev regime. So the Kiev regime itself has to be destroyed. And the US and the British and the French and the Germans are trying to preserve the Kiev regime. They just don't know how. Now, what's happened is that eventually, and I think this realization has now finally been reached by the higher levels of the Russian government, they have to destroy the Kiev regime. They have to take most of Ukraine. They might leave the West, sort of Bandera land, to be an shall we say, an undigestible pill for the Polish to swallow. But they'll need to take most of it, and they'll need to reconstitute some version of a Ukrainian state there, I would guess. And it's an outcome they didn't really want, but they've been left with no other option to take. There will be the only negotiation that the US is prepared to accept is one that leaves something of the Kiev regime in place. They've made that really clear over and over again. The Russians can't afford to leave the Kiev regime in place, because if they do, then the Kiev regime will be brought into NATO by hook or by crook. So the war has to continue. And the US and the British and the others will, as the Ukrainian manpower issue becomes more and more severe and the equipment issue becomes worse, they'll try and switch to terrorism and insurgency tactics, Gladio operations and that kind of thing, which I'm sure they've had enough time to develop all kinds of nasty surprises for the Russians, and the Russians will be probably aware that something of that kind is waiting for them. But now we will see a quicker and quicker shift to terrorism and insurgency tactics on behalf of the NATO side, because they can't afford to keep the war going as it stands. So they're not shedding the proxies. This phase of the war is coming to an end because they've been defeated. So they're going to try and keep hold of the proxy by engaging in a different form of warfare. When it comes to Taiwan, I think that there is probably there's all kinds of rows going on inside the US imperial bureaucracy over what their priorities should be. Some of them think that it will be a good idea to stage some sort of provocation with the Chinese around the Philippines. Some of them still think Taiwan's a good option. Eldridge Colby is a little cleverer than most, so maybe he's got other ideas. Others don't want to switch there at all. Others think that now's the time to go all in on Iran, even though I've explained many times before they can't do that. So they're kind of stuck. There's a row over which way to go. Now, they're not shedding occupied Korea, and I doubt they'll shed Japan either. They can't afford to. I mean, the reason why they keep occupied Korea is because ultimately they want to get into the north one day, and they want to have US sponsored comprador rule over the entirety of the Korean Peninsula, so that they can get a strategic advantage when it comes to being right on the border of Russia and China. Japan's crucial to that as well. Now, could it be that Trump fucks it up to the point where Japan sheds US influence? I doubt it. I think that Trump is kicking the puppets in the face because he knows he can. There's not a single Japanese leader has survived in office without US approval for too long, anyway. And the same goes for the increasingly unstable Korean puppet regime. So they're not shedding the puppets. There's an argument going on about what's the best way to use them and where's the best theater of operations to focus on, because they can't be everywhere now. They never could be. In reality, they give the impression that they could be everywhere, but now they're being stretched by the Russians in Ukraine, by the Iranians and others in West Asia. A war with the Chinese would be a complete and utter disaster, and they all know it. So now they're in a quandary about what to do. But I don't think the proxies will get ditched. I think the proxies will go down with the ship, so to speak. Just a question of if any domestic revolts break out in order to disturb this. Right. Just going through some questions here. Alm says, question, what would the most likely scenario of Western imperialist collapse look like, and how could we go about ensuring it doesn't reemerge? Well, we're in a stage of it now, to answer your question, which is that their ability to extract profit from capital export into neo-colonial countries is being compromised piece by piece and bit by bit. They still get away with an awful lot of capital export. Excuse me. And they still have a long way to go down. What it looks like in terms of it not re-emerging, when you get stronger states that can actually resist the imposition of wholly unfair and one-sided terms of trade, that's one stage of the collapse. The biggest factor that would prevent a return of imperialism from European or the American side is the overthrow of the ruling classes inside those countries. We're a way away from that at the moment, but I think we're getting closer to it. The only thing that's going to make sure that the imperialists don't re-emerge is for them to be overthrown in their homeland. Now, they can be weakened, and we should welcome each time they are weakened. And each defeat inflicted upon the ruling class of Britain is a defeat that the working class here should embrace and champion. That's the thing. So I think that what we need to do is to be absolutely clear here about the way in which the disintegration is coming about, and clearly explain it to the working class, and ready the working class in the imperial core countries for the task of ridding ourselves of this parasitic and rotten ruling class, because that's the only way that this is going to be ended. Right. Okay. So I apologize if we've gone past your question, because the program I'm using, Restream, tends to cut off questions after a certain point. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to switch over to YouTube to have a look at this, and I'll take a look there to see where things are. Just bear with me for a moment. Right, just waiting for the questions to load up. But I saw some interesting ones there, and I don't want to miss them. Right. Okay. Right. So, hang on. Someone's asked me my opinion on Mike Lee. Interesting. I'll get back to that in just a moment. Okay. So. Right. So let's have a look here. Let's go down. Anti-revisionist Marxist-Leninist says, I don't think it's that simple. What about the workers' aristocracy? They don't have means of production, but they are still not friendly to the working class. Well, they might be labor aristocracy, but they're still workers. They might think that they're better than everybody else, but they're still workers. So then they might be hostile to the rest of the working class, but they're still workers. You see, don't mistake a temporary attitude brought about by generation after generation of privileges, etc., for something which is immovable. These things can be moved. The issue for us is that we as communists shouldn't be basing ourselves on the labor aristocracy, knowing full well all of the the poisonous national chauvinistic and social democratic legacies the labor aristocracy has. But the labor aristocracy is still workers and still need to be appealed to. You need to appeal to them, though, but not pander to them. Not pander to them and say that their privileges can be sustained, or that their old way of life can be brought back again. It can't. But the divisions within the working class are for us to overcome, not to reinforce. Ben says, I'll just comment from my experience in Eastern Europe. There was never a more cohesive social time than the 70s. Every workplace had all sorts of clubs, resorts, libraries, etc. Yeah. And atomization of the working class is a tactic that the ruling class, of course, applies all the time. Right. Let's scroll down. Ben says, Vladimir Putin directly addressed via letter the Communist Party of the Russian Federation conference in a congratulatory way. I wanted to ask if this is common or unusual. More common these days, didn't used to be. I mean, these days, Putin has and the Russian government have stolen a lot of the policies in a sort of watered down form of the KPRF. KPRF have also been key to the special military operation, in that they pushed for it for many, many years. And also that much of what the KPRF demand, Putin, in his congratulatory note to them, talked about their work preserving historical memory, meaning the KPRF's defense of the Soviet period and defense of the Stalin period against Russian liberals and anti-communists. Now, that would have been unthinkable for Putin to do like 20 years ago, or I think even 10 years ago, unless somebody's got something which can prove me wrong. The fact that Putin's addressing them and congratulating them in their conference says that there are better relations now between the leadership of the Russian state and the Communist Party of the Russian Federation than there ever have been. I think largely because the KPRF's analysis of the situation in Ukraine and the situation with regard to the US has been proven to be correct. And they are, of course, they have played a crucial role in the recovery of the reputation of Comrade Stalin within Russia. And it's gone so far now that the Russian state itself is trying to appropriate the legacy of Stalin. Interestingly enough, the KPRF called openly for the re-evaluation of the 1956 Khrushchev secret speech, which they've distanced themselves from and criticized anyway. But it does rather, there is something of an influence operation going on, because like the recovery of the reputation of Stalin now seems to be at the very least tolerated by the Russian state, or in the case of like the restoration of the relief in the Moscow metro, openly encouraged. The reputation of Stalin is being publicly restored. I think eventually you're going to see the Volgograd be returned to its historic name of Stalingrad. This is clearly like another reworking of the Russian ruling group towards a more pro-Soviet orientation, but not a revolutionary orientation, if that makes sense. So yes, it's interesting that that was done. We'll see quite how far Putin's prepared to go. Almir says, question, I never want to have a boss. I work for myself and don't have any employees, so I don't exploit anyone. Am I still bourgeois? No. I mean, unless you actually are owning like a massive amount of means of production, you're like well, depends upon what business you're engaged in. If you're a sole operator working for yourself, then essentially you're like a worker who's doing like self-employed stuff. You're a self-employed worker. you don't own means of production. You don't own capital. So you're not exploiting anybody. It means you're a self-employed worker, a sole trader, as to use the old terminology. You're not part of the bourgeoisie. To be part of the bourgeoisie, you have to not only own means of production or land, but you have to be able to essentially live and never work again, because you can just live on your accumulated capital. Now, the numbers of people in the bourgeoisie is actually incredibly small, but they've got a wider layer of servants. So you're not part of the bourgeoisie unless you're hiding some significant business interest from us, Almir. One could argue that some self-employed people enter the petty bourgeoisie because they control some amount of capital, but most self-employed people are just working class. They're just not part of a workplace, or not part of a collective workplace, shall we say. Jimmy says, given that only the strong and powerful countries with a strong military and economy can be sovereign, will ultimately require the superpowers to agree to transition to socialism and communism. Don't think agreement is anything to do with it. It will take the overthrow of the imperialist states by the domestic working classes in the end to fully transition to, well, workers' states and begin the transition to socialism. Now, you say in your follow-up comment, otherwise war, coups, and sanctions will be imposed by the capitalists. That's true. But wars and counter strikes can be imposed by the organized proletariat as well, and the organized peasantry in some cases. So it's not just a one-way thing. What's been demonstrated over the last 3 years is that the actual military strength of the imperialists is a lot weaker than was imagined or that they were projecting. I mean, that had already been exposed by the fact they couldn't win the war in Afghanistan after 20 years. They couldn't win the war in Iraq either after many years. So their weakness has already been exposed. They can do all kinds of things and have rain down death and terror upon people, but they can't win wars. And that's something that we need to draw lessons from. YepX, hello to you, says, what are your thoughts about India blocking a BRICS resolution against Israel and the international community demanding that they be kicked out of BRICS? Well, India's a funny one. I mean, the Indian bourgeois are playing a double game, as always. I mean, I've gone on record before as saying that BRICS isn't any kind of finalized new system. It's a stage that is being gone through. The Indian bourgeois are in it because it's that they want to have their relationship with Russia and others, but they also want to face East and West at the same time. So they still want to do a lot of business in the West and with the United States and with Britain, and that's one of the reasons why. And there is an ideological component, but they are, so invested in Israel. It is partly because of their investment in U.S. imperialism, and also there's an ideological factor there, and that these fucking wretched reactionary Hindutva guys see in Zionism a kindred spirit, which doesn't speak well for them. But India is not always going to be that way. India's got a powerful proletariat and numerous peasantry. So, like the contradictions of the Indian bourgeois aren't always going to be there. They will be challenged by their own domestic working class and peasantry again very soon. So, in terms of the fate of India, look, some in the Indian ruling class think that they can win big in this current scenario by essentially riding two horses at once. Riding the Western horse, shall we say, in their business with the US-led bloc, and also being in BRICS, especially doing a lot of business with Russia and others, and face again like trying to benefit from the division of the world into blocks by trying to fit into both. Ultimately, though, BRICS is not just a question of national governments. It's a question of the internal dynamics of class war within those countries. It's a question of like imperialism's actions against those countries, which means that BRICS isn't the finished product. And I doubt that actually a BRICS resolution against Israel would have much impact more than what's been said already. So I don't regard it as too important, but it does reveal the contradictions of the Indian ruling class. They're not. I don't think they'll leave BRICS because they've got too many interests which serve well by being members of it. But it does point out the contradictions in the BRICS system. BRICS itself is not going to be the thing that dismantles US imperialism. It's a step on that road, but it's not. It's by no means the destination. Hello to Comrade Naylor. Good afternoon to Jenny, our moderator. Just going through some more comments here. Right. Mystery Man says it's even worse here in the US. The working class here is addicted to video games, social media, and substances, and they think communism means they lose all their civil rights. Well, they don't have any civil rights at the moment. Trump's making it abundantly clear just how few they have. So the political education provided by Trump will continue to be impressive. But just to answer Mystery Man's point, the situation in the US is bad. And it will get worse. But again, like the struggle will evolve, and the building disciplined revolutionary organization will be required. And some have started on that road already in the US. But it will be a long road to walk, as it will be for us. So we should not give in to the counsels of despair. I keep seeing people saying, "Oh, but surely there must be a revolt now. Surely there must be a revolt now." And this is why we're going to continue to do the series about what revolution looks like, because I don't think these people who say there must be a revolt know what that means. Because a revolt, people have got images in their mind about what a revolution is, and none of it accords with reality. To actually revolt and stand a chance of success against the ruling class takes a huge level of organization, education, and determination, none of which are there at the moment, and which we need to be in the process of building. But people expect, like, go out in the streets, get 1 million people out there. They must listen now. Well, they're not listening, and they're not going to. And until we reach the realization, until there's a realization of the fact that this system cannot deliver anymore for us, and what it once did deliver is going and is only going to keep disappearing, then until that realization is reached, we're always going to be crippled in terms of what we can do, because you get the wretched left just running around screaming about the need for a return to social democracy or return to the New Deal or other such crap, until the realization comes that, and that can only be brought about by organization and education, that it is only with the removal of the ruling class and the destruction of the bourgeois state that we will go forward, then we're stuck. So the reformist disease needs to be purged from the system. Question from Philip Blair: what are the extreme British government moves against Palestine action indicative of? Indicative of the fact they have no solution to anything anymore. And so the Palestine Action thing is interesting, because Palestine Action and their protests and their sabotage operations do disrupt things. They do make a dent into like Elbit, the arms manufacturer, and they do their stunts do cause public embarrassment to the government. But I mean, the fact is, the reason why that they're taking such actions now is this didn't come from nowhere. Palestine Action have been banned and classified as a terrorist organization under legislation that was passed 25 years ago. And I remember it being passed at the time, and arguments were being made that this will be used to ban groups that are peaceful, like Palestine Action have never committed an act of violence against anybody, as far as I know. I think we would have heard about it had they done so, or could have even been accused of doing so. So this is where it's been going for years. And the government, again, a Labour government brought in the 2000 Terrorism Act, and it was brought in for this purpose. This was its real intent, which was it was always about being able to classify even like completely peaceful or like even pacifistic movements as being terroristic. And they've been preparing the ground for this in certain ways. This is why you ever wondered why like Just Stop Oil and the other groups who like, you know, sit down in front of working class people on like motorway slip roads and bridges. The reason why they were allowed to go as far as they did was to set up and build public support for repressive legislation. So that's the reason why, Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil were allowed to run around riling people up, because they were preparing for moves like this. And the ultimate aim of the Terrorism Act in 2000 and its successor legislation is to make it possible for the state to lock up anybody at any time, make the definition of terrorism so broad that it could cover almost anybody and almost anything. Now, everything though has every action has a reaction, and by doing this to Palestine Action and literally threatening people with 14 years in jail if they support it, that organization, what they're doing is they're taking the mask off. Now, for the longest time, yes, like people who were in CND would get arrested for like obstruction and, you know, trespassing and stuff like that, but they never seriously thought about banning CND. Probably because CND is a completely useless organization which ultimately aided Western imperialism. But they did do things at one stage that annoyed the ruling class, much like Palestine Action do now. But it was the more sort of reactionary Tories and Labour and sort of right-wing Labour MPs demand that something must be done about it. Now they're doing it. So what they're doing is they're revealing to you that like there's nothing that you can do, either within the law or within the bounds of generally formally accepted limitations of boundaries of protest. That if you try and do any kind of like effective protest, that they will not only ban you, but they will also like throw you in jail just for being a member or supporting this organization. Now, I think what they're hoping is that by doing this, these repressive actions, the support for the Palestinian cause will wither away. I think that's what they're hoping. I think they'll be disappointed because there's too much water under that particular bridge now. Too much time has passed, too much blood has been shed, too much has been revealed about the duplicity and the murderousness of the British state and its long-term employment of the services of the Zionists. So I don't think this will be an effective way of them countering that. I think what will probably happen is that the test cases about this legislation will go to trial, and I think some of them will collapse. I think many of them will collapse. And if they insist that they are going to send these people to jail for 14 years, then it will be another nail in the coffin of the bourgeoisie themselves. See, all of their arguments about the legitimacy of their system basically revolve around these days that this is the freest and most secure system you can ever have. Well, it's not either of those things. And it's revealed itself via the enthusiastic support of the British imperialists for the genocide. It's revealed itself to be a system built on blood and savagery, bloodshed and savagery. So this is not going to cause the support for Palestine to go away. It's not going to cause actions that the group Palestine in Action, who have been labeled as terrorists, the kind of actions that they do will probably continue. They'll just be done by organizations that don't have a name and organizations that go underground. And the government's response will get more and more extreme because they just have no way of responding to this now. They've been revealed to be these lying, bullshitting, mass murderers, and they don't know what to do. The only thing they know how to do is to try and repress this, hit people over the head, and hope it goes away. Well, it's too far gone for that now. The full consequences of this might take a good few years to work themselves through, but I'm convinced that this will add to the number of people waking up to the fact that the entire system needs to go. And it will reveal the law and the legislative process to be a completely bankrupt reactionary joke, which it is. Matt says that he appreciates the video about what revolution actually looks like. It's not the Molotov riotous nonsense we see with Maidan, color revolutions. Real revolutions are military, as Mao says, power comes from the barrel of a gun. Well, one of the central points I'm looking to make with regard to that series is that the real revolutions are, well, not necessarily bloody, but they can be. And the point about them is that when they break out, or when people think they're involved in revolutionary action, they're often not. People have an image in their mind of a revolution that is basically based on images from France 1968, which is a failed revolution, or the color revolutions from 1989 onwards, which were essentially intelligence operations and manipulate PR psyop jobs done with the collaboration of defectors from inside the country that's being targeted, where like the army refuses to move or defects to the other side, and like you have like revolution faked as a sort of psyop and theater. In reality, you should study the revolutionary processes in the Soviet Union as it became, revolutionary China, the DPRK, Vietnam, to see that these revolutions often last for whole generations and often leave many, many thousands dead because the old ruling class won't leave the scene of history without being pushed off. And that's an unpleasant realization. But as we've just been talking about with regard to like state repression, like it's the ruling class's state, and they are feeling themselves to be losing their power, and they are going to lash out more and more and more as time goes on. And we need to understand why that is, and we need to bring that understanding to the working class. Edward says, question about the DPRK. Is it too dangerous and a poison pill for the DPRK to reintegrate with the South, even on a Juche Marxist-Leninist basis? Are there too many bourgeois tendencies in the South? Well, the DPRK has formally given up the idea of a peaceful reintegration. That happened a couple of years ago, a peaceful negotiated reintegration. They now say that can't happen. And it's a correct judgment, of course, because the US imperialists have no interest in that happening. South Korea's job is to act as sort of permanent garrison for the US, and to ultimately provoke a war to reunify the peninsula under US control. Now that can't happen now because the DPRK, People's Korea is too strong. It's not only the fact that they have a nuclear weapons program. It's the fact that like the internal regime inside the DPRK, so the dictatorship of the proletariat there, is too strong. It is being effectively organized under the terms outlined by Kim Il-sung and other great revolutionary leaders. There is a dictatorship of the proletariat in the DPRK. I mean, yes, they they call it, so they use slightly different language for it, but it's the proper application of Marxism-Leninism to Korean conditions. And so conquering the North is out of the question. The US has tried everything with regard to like internal coups, color revolutions, and none of it works. So eventually what's going to happen is that the US puppet state in the South is going to disintegrate or fall into a terminal crisis. Now, I think the leadership in the North understands very well the risks that poses. So reintegration of the two countries would probably be done cautiously over many years. There's too much rot and imperialist influence in the South to just be reintegrated into the North. Quite what the official policy of the North is with regard to that, I'd need to look up. But I know they abandoned the peaceful route to reunification it was a couple of years ago now. Right. Moving on. Sid says, I remember I was kicked out of a Discord channel a few years ago because I advocated the overthrow of the state, and some idiot moderator told me no ultra-left adventurism allowed. Well, it's not ultra-left adventurism. It's like, it's a recognition of reality, which is that the bourgeois state cannot be reformed, especially in the imperialist countries, cannot be laid hold of and used for our purposes, and therefore it must be destroyed. Because if you're going to overthrow the ruling class, you need to overthrow their machine by which they enforce their rule, which is the bourgeois state. Now, can we do that tomorrow? Sadly, no. We don't have the forces to do it. But that is where we're going. It has to be where we're going because there's no other way that our victory can be properly reinforced. But this is the problem that that we have in the West, which is that there's too many people who will imagine that it can never be done. Well, it can be done. These states aren't that old. These states are, in their current form, a couple of 100, 200, 300 years old. That's not that old. The class that built them is coming to the end of its shelf life, and arguably did a long time ago. So they will be overthrown. Again, you can't snap your fingers and cause that to happen. But that is the way that it will go, and it is towards that we must build. Right. My address says the US and Britain seem to be doing everything possible to help the process along and implode from within. Well, they have no choice. When when the ruling class is that degenerated and parasitic, everything else, everything they try to do to restore themselves goes wrong. Right. Just going through the question. Sid says, I now believe Mein Kampf was completely plagiarized from Henry Ford's The International Jew. Wouldn't surprise me. Hitler wasn't exactly an original thinker. Ben says, Traore, Burkina Faso is tiny, but an awesome transformative example. There are cranes of construction everywhere now. Roads being built, new skylines just by ejecting the French. Eject the French. Find international partners who will actually genuinely partner with you, not just seek to extract wealth from you, and build up your economy to be more independent and not just a source of resource extraction for the French or the Americans or the British or anybody else. And you will start to see development. Again, there's a long process of struggle to unify and modernize Burkina Faso, but Traore, building upon the legacy of Thomas Sankara, has started that process. And we must, in whatever way we can, support them, support the Burkinabes, the Malians, the Nigerians, the Chadians, and others who are looking to throw off the yoke of French neocolonialism. And that's going to be of benefit to the workers in France as well, because it forces a confrontation with the French ruling class ever closer. And ultimately, that can only benefit the workers in the imperial core. Let's go down. Dmitry Shanish says, class unity between the workers of the core of imperialism and the workers of oppressed countries never loses its importance. That's true. Right. Going. Jimmy asks, given that only powerful countries with a strong military and economy can be sovereign, will it ultimately require the superpowers to agree to transition to world socialism? I think I've already answered that question. It's not going to be a question of that. It's going to be a question of internal revolution against the ruling classes there. But the Revolutionary Party must have an understanding of the need for a military strategy. Almir says, NATO countries are supposed to bump defense spending to 5% by 2035 to buy and then give more weapons to Ukraine. How can Ukraine even hold out that long? It won't. Look, the best hope, to go back to the Ukraine question, the best hope that the US had was that the Russians would stupidly agree to an unconditional ceasefire, and then that would lead to them being able to preserve the Kiev regime and have a period of time to build it back up again. But the Russians aren't that stupid to allow the US to walk away with the Kiev regime intact. So they've realized that they have to destroy the Kiev regime in order to take control of most of the territory of Ukraine, even if they reconstitute a Ukrainian state in the end. They can't allow the US and the British to continue to control the territory of Ukraine, because the only purpose Ukraine serves, forget even the looting of Ukraine that would be done under Trump's minerals deal, or the looting of Ukrainian farmland. Far more important than any of that is the strategic position that control of Ukraine gives the US and the British, but in particular those two. And that's why, with the realization of what the British game and the American game is in Ukraine, there can only be one outcome, which is, and it's not a negotiated one, it's going to be a military one, which is what I think the Russians are gearing up to enforce now. So to go back to Almir's question, look, the 5% on defense that Trump's bragging about and bloviating about, it's not going to be achieved. They're going to say they're going to be 5% by 2035. What the hell's going to exist in Europe by 2035? Will the EU exist? Will NATO exist? I mean, this is fantasy island stuff. Playing with numbers on balance sheets that just bear no resemblance to reality. Going through more comments. Hello to T.G. Wilson, who's with us. Right. Just scrolling through here because I've kind of I think I've done the classic thing of spending too much time answering the early questions, and some other stuff has come in. Email me if I miss anything. There's always more questions than I have time for. Can you recommend some other African Marxist authors besides Nkrumah? Yes, Amilcar Cabral is one who I've read. His stuff is on the Marxist Internet Archives, and the Guinea-Bissau revolt is quite interesting to read about. So Cabral is always interesting to read. So that's someone to potentially start with. Trying to think of some others now. I mean, a lot of the other African revolutionary leaders are interesting to study, like the Zimbabwean revolutionary process that was written about in a collection of works by Harpal Bra, founder of the CPGBML. There was a collection of works of his called Chimurenga, which which is about the Zimbabwean struggle. So I'd recommend that. Trying to think of other stuff to talk, other people to mention now. The revolutionary struggles in like Angola and Mozambique, worth reading about. So I would definitely look at those. Tell you what, I will come back with more of a comprehensive list when I've had time to go back through things and research it. But go through Cabral's stuff on the Marxist Internet Archive. Some really interesting stuff on that. Right. Sid says, which is why left-wing communism is so important. That's by Lenin. Because if the working class doesn't know what you're doing and why you're doing it, then you're just LARPing. Very true. Right. Well, the workers aren't the problem, to answer Mystery Man's point. The working class is where it is due to the fact that the working class has lost a class war, or lost several significant battles in the class war, and is demoralized and split as a result. So this is where things are. This is what many of us were born into. We were born into the aftermath of this defeat. Didn't realize that that's what we were growing up in. But it's up to us. I mean, we two things need to happen. There's subjective and objective factors. Objective factors are the wider situation. So the degeneration of imperialism, the deindustrialization of the imperial core countries, the defeat of the organized working class in the various struggles that took place after the 1970s, or during and after the 1970s. So, and that's the objective situation which we face. The subjective factor, which is lacking, which is the Revolutionary Party, the working class Revolutionary Party that can actually play its role in leading the workers to revolutionary conclusions. Now, some of the time, even if you have the subject, even if you had like a revolutionary party that was in some way capable of leading a revolt, sometimes the objective factors are just not there. So the objective factor being the state of play in the class war, the objective factor being the how the working class is either unified or not. So you had. You could have had like the presence of some conditions and the absence of others. So at the moment, you have, objectively speaking, in the imperialist countries, a greater and greater number of the working class being immiserated, but the subjective factor is lacking, meaning the leadership of a revolutionary party is lacking. Or sometimes you have a subjective factor, which is the revolutionary party, or one of the subjective factors. One of the major subjective factors would be present, perhaps, or an organization which could play a revolutionary role is there, and sometimes the objective factors aren't there, so that the working class is not in a position where it is prepared to even think about the revolutionary road. It's the coming together of the subjective and the objective to form like a unified point of action that we aim towards. So like at the moment, we're aiming to get to the point where the subjective factor can be present when the revolutionary, should we say, the revolutionary moment arrives. Subjective factor isn't there at the moment, and therefore we end up with working class revolts that peter out and don't go anywhere. So like I never blame the class for the condition that it's in. It's our job to change that. It's a big job and it's a frustrating one, which is why a lot of people don't last the course and drop out of it. But it's not easy to maintain a revolutionary position at a time of unprecedented defeat and disaster. Right. Just going through. Some comments here. Right. Okay. So I'm just going to open up and see if there's address some of the comments coming in off email. So just bear with me a moment. That up. Okay. Right. Okay, the email's not loading for some reason. Okay, so right, what I'll do then is we'll draw things. No, we got another question here for me to address before we draw things to a close for tonight. We got from Il Mariel. Does modern communism make difference between industrial capitalism and financial capitalism? Well, communists have always made that distinction between different phases of capitalism. So bear in mind, finance capital in the Marxist-Leninist tradition refers specifically to the merger of industrial and money capital, which occurs in the later 19th and early 20th century in the European powers and in the United States to form the core of what comes to be known as the imperialist system. So under capitalism, though, the move to financialization is baked into it. It's very much part of it because, as Marx argues himself in Capital Volume 2, like the bourgeoisie is periodically seized by the desire to make money without producing anything. And sometimes they believe that they can and go on a binge in that direction. Now, that was Marx writing in the 1870s, I think. Bear in mind, Capital Volume 2 was put together by Engels after Marx's death. And then Lenin takes that analysis further by demonstrating how there is the shift away from the production of commodities to the export of capital as being essentially the quickest route to the maximum profit. And that is an inevitable transformation under capitalism. And yes, imperialism emerged in the West because they were the first capitalist nations, but that tendency is built in to capitalism no matter where it emerges. The tendency towards maximizing profit as quickly as possible and as ruthlessly as possible, and also the tendency to try and get away from the necessity of actually controlling means of production and just make your money by make your profit by moving money around, having your production based elsewhere, having your raw resource extraction done somewhere else. This is how imperialism operates today through unfair exchange. So, yes, Marxists always drew the distinction between industrial and financial capitalism. The point is that financialized or finance capital imperialism grows out of industrial capitalism. The two run alongside each other for a while. But you get to the point where there is this transformation from industry into finance, and that's always part of capitalism. Now, to stop that, you need to get rid of capitalism. You need to get rid of capitalist classes' ownership and control over the means of production. Now, it's interesting to see how the CPC will adapt to this, because deindustrialization is actually hardwired into capitalism itself. So whether the CPC will be able to work themselves around that particular question, that particular problem, because they are running in the end a market economy, and can they prevent deindustrialization will be an interesting question. But yes, we've always drawn the distinction between the two. But I would also say that some argue that you can just restrain financialization and keep to industrial capitalism. But industrial capitalism and the capitalist class it has its dynamics that have always been present within it, and the dynamic towards deindustrialization and financialization is there from the very beginning. Right. Bulging Battery says, will the US and NATO army come with nuclear weapons? No, because they're afraid of the Russian response. Quite simply. They would be afraid of what the Russians would do to them if they did that. That and the fact that it's rare that you give control over a nuclear weapon to a proxy. I'm convinced that the Israeli nuclear weapon system has various backdoors built into it, which means that it can only really be controlled from the United States. There's this theory floating around that what's he's called, James Jesus Angleton and others, provided Israel with nuclear weapons in defiance of Kennedy, etc. Maybe that bit's true, but in reality, the reason why you give Israel a nuclear weapon is because it furthers U.S. imperialism's aims for Israel. And U.S. imperialism, if it gives a country a nuclear weapon, you can be damn sure that they're the ones who ultimately have their finger on the trigger. Bear in mind what's said about, just to continue to use the Israeli example, what's said about Israel's nuclear doctrine, or the Samson option, which is that if they're threatened, they'll blow up the entire Middle East. Now, I don't actually believe that that's true. Now, of course, there was some in Israel who would happily do that. But I think that what that actually is a means by which they seek to have an ultimate sanction against attempts to defeat the Israeli regime, but that the finger on the trigger is the finger of the United States. And that the Samson option is a threat, a madman threat, issued to the peoples of the region to make them believe that it is impossible to destroy Israel. I think it's an empty threat. I think it's the imperialists themselves that are making empty threats. I don't believe that the Samson option really exists. It's something which he's talked about extensively in the same way that, like, Nixon and Reagan used to talk about, we can win a nuclear war, or, I said to that Brezhnev, there's no way I wouldn't hesitate. I would hesitate to push the button. That's my bad Nixon impression. The reason why all this sort of madman rhetoric is engaged is to intimidate the opposition into giving in. That's what the Rand Corporation used to use game theory to game out. Is what a lot of the sort of the psychologists and psychiatrists employed by the American think tank world and the Department of Defense and the American intelligence agencies work out, which is how to intimidate your opponent into backing down. And they successfully used nuclear blackmail ultimately against the Soviet leadership, who capitulated in the face of it, both at first under Khrushchev and then later under Gorbachev. So this is what they're doing with the Israeli nuclear program, and it's ultimately what they are. The reason why they nominally gave Israel nuclear weapons was because it furthers that aim of acting as a giant intimidatory factor for the peoples of West Asia. Be careful, or the madmen will blow you up. Now, are there madmen in Israel who would happily do that? Yes, there are. Are they in control of the nuclear weapon system? No, I think US controlled people are. Doesn't mean that these bastards won't do it, but it does mean that that it's a system that remains firmly under their control. Where are we now? Okay. Yeah, the Almir is agreeing. Yeah, the Israeli nuclear weapons, like the British nuclear weapons, are controlled by the US. The British did have an independent nuclear program, but they folded it in with the US's program a long time ago. The British just get to parade around with nuclear weapons that are ultimately controlled by the United States. As again, British Ministry of Defense internal reports admit that essentially the systems are all controlled by the United States. They can't fire them without the United States. The submarines can't run without systems provided by the United States. It's fake. It's all completely, it's a fake job. The British have a nuclear weapons program as long as the United States is prepared to pretend that they have one. Some Iranian sources claim to release a list of targets that Israel has for the Samson option, including Western cities. Yeah, that's a sort of psyop shit. That's like the kind of shit that the US via Israel puts out there to reinforce support and by the application of terror, basically. That's what we're talking about here, right? Right. Okay. So I'm going to draw things to a conclusion for this evening. I'll be back with you tomorrow with an update on what is happening in the battlefields of the Russia-Ukraine war. So come back to me for that one. Thanks to all 429 of you watching at the moment, 201 on X and 222 on YouTube, with 1 and 2 and 3 on Kick and Rumble and Twitch respectively. So thanks to everybody who's joined us tonight. Do come back again tomorrow. If I haven't addressed your question tonight, I will get around to them eventually. But until then, I bid you good evening, and here's a video to play out with.
Утреннего стяг в жизни важен первый шаг. Слышишь, реют над страною ветры яростных атак. И вновь продолжает собой, и сердцу тревожно в груди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. Весть летит во все концы, вы поверьте нам, отцы. Будут новые победы, станут новые бойцы. Милости не жди, жизнь для правды не щади. Нам, ребята, в этой жизни только с правдой по пути.